Hello, everybody. Welcome to CoinFund Q&A. Today we have Mercury Protocol. Mercury Protocol is a platform for communication built on blockchain technologies, and we'll dive into that. We have Preethi, we have Ryan, and we have Ian from the team. Welcome, guys. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. So do you want to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the lead engineer on the team, and then a little bit about me. So I previously worked at Coinbase, and so that's how I kind of got into the blockchain space around 2014. I was working at Andreessen Horowitz, and I remember when Chris Dixon made the investment in Coinbase, I started to get really interested in blockchain and just started to do a lot of research, and then ended up working there as an engineer after I left Andreessen Horowitz. And so then that kind of kept my interest in the space, and then I started doing a lot of Ethereum development this year, and then came across this idea of Mercury Protocol and really just fell in love with what we're doing. So been doing this now.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm Ryan Ozonian, and I'm the CEO and co-creator alongside Preethi of the Mercury Protocol. My background is in application development, created a software, a privacy technology called Dust, alongside Mark Cuban. And as we got more and more interested in blockchain technology, it seemed like Dust could be the perfect fit to build a new kind of protocol on top of, or showcase something like the Mercury Protocol within, so that we could basically create a proof of concept and show that blockchain technology could be utilized in such a great way for messaging. You know, we teamed up with Preethi and the rest of our team, and, you know, working on the protocol for the last 5-6 months, and you know, we're excited to get it out there.
And I'm Ian Connolly. I'm project manager at Radical App. I've overseen feature development for Dust, Broadcast, and now Mercury. Most of the nitty-gritty from product level to implementation details, and just sort of have my hand in all the pots there. My background's in media mechanics analysis, so that sort of came into play with designing the Mercury ecosystem and the product theory behind that, and looking forward to see how it does in the real world.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you for introducing yourselves. And can you guys tell us a little bit about what Mercury Protocol is as a product? So you mentioned it's a platform for online communication. That's a very general way of describing it. So how do you, like, what is the user experience and what is the product experience of something like that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's less of a product, and we're actually building a protocol that allows any social networking application to be built on top. So the idea is, as Ryan mentioned, they've been working on Dust, which is a private messenger, and we really think that there's a lot of inherent flaws in how social network is being done today. So we want to kind of rethink how social networking is done on the Ethereum blockchain via Mercury Protocol. And so a few different things. One, for example, is we think that a much better way to build a social network is, instead of monetizing and owning all the user data, we think having a tokenized model. Now that with the blockchain, you can actually have tokens on the internet, we can actually use that token system to build a social network on the blockchain that uses this tokenized system to align incentives in the right way. So the whole premise and the whole beauty of blockchain is that it allows you to use tokens to align incentives between various parties. So in our case, it's the content creator, the content consumer, and the application developer. So we can build a tokenized economy that kind of aligns the incentives across these three people, and doesn't necessarily require an application to own all the data and monetize off that data without giving the user any sense of privacy or security. And so we kind of use the term like tokenized economy, or ownerless content is another thing. Like every application that builds on the protocol isn't going to own the content that the user creates. Instead, it's a shared It's shared and decentralized across the entire protocol, and anyone who integrates with the protocol can use that content and use that data. And so kind of we're at a protocol level and less at a user application level, but Dust will be the first product to use the protocol so that we can kind of feed the network with our own products, and then we'll expect other applications to be built on top.
Got it. So when you talk about aligning incentives between the participants in this system, it seems to imply that incentives are misaligned in other applications today. So let's dig into that a little bit. So how do you see this as kind of an improvement over, I guess, communications protocols or communications applications that are around today?
Ian, want to take that?
Sure. So one of the things that we see as an issue now with the current industry standard of communication businesses is that people have now come to expect that a communication service is free in terms of a social networking application. If you charged $5 for a Facebook competitor, absolutely no chance. And even as free, there's still a very difficult uphill battle against the existing oligarchy applications like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. So those businesses, even for a free service, it's still a business. They still have developers, they still have costs, they still
Oh, you're cutting out.
data. Anything that they found that they can enterprise at scale. So what we're trying to do is demonstrate an alternative to mining, monetizing aggregated user data. So our response to that is the tokenized ecosystem, where the more users and the more applications build services on top of the protocol and the tokens we provided, the more the more utility value the token has. And theoretically, you can use that to incentivize both developers and application users to join the network and be active on it as more services come online.
So Ryan, you cut out a little bit, but I think what you were saying was essentially that kind of in these traditional applications, you have you have the market of consumers who basically don't want to pay for the service of communicating. Like email has always been free, for example, or text messaging, and at least online, and so forth. So, what you see in these traditional kind of businesses is that you have a three-way marketplace between kind of users or content creators, content consumers, and then usually advertisers, because that's the way that this market actually monetizes. In other words, the money comes from advertising dollars, and those dollars are used to pay the costs of maintaining the platform. And do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So why can we tell us a little bit about why does that misalign incentives?
Because when you think about it, like it's in the application developer's interest to collect all this data. That's the only option that these developers have to monetize the platform, right? Like there's no other option today besides doing that. And so even at Dust, right, like the only way we can really monetize is with the traditional model is if we want to start introducing ads on the platform. And you've seen this with Twitter, you've seen this with Facebook, you've seen this with Snapchat, Instagram. Like they provide high utility when they get up and running, and then all of a sudden Instagram is all full of ads everywhere. The stories are full of ads. The Snapchat stories are full of ads. It just kind of turns the application into what was initially like a very useful product into that. And so if we can provide an alternative, I think it's a much better model.
Okay, so you're removing the sort of source of revenue there, which is like the advertisers, right? So then the question becomes, where does the money come from?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a few things to touch on there. One, we're not necessarily eliminating that opportunity. So for example, one of the first features we're integrating into Dust is the ability for the average user to promote their content at scale. So if, for example, you're an up-and-coming content producer and you want to have a pseudonymous account that's not about your real friend network, about your real life promotion or whatever, and you want to promote to people who you think might enjoy your content, depending on the application. So it's all about application's choice to integrate what types of tokenized features. But for example, in this type of feature, you can still promote your own content. So at an enterprise scale, that is still available for advertisers. And the idea is to allow more features to be developed that can be tokenized instead of just this single funding feature that we see in current social media. So it's not necessarily to eliminate that mechanic, but to provide more methods of feature development that can support the application.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
Sorry?
Oh, I said, yeah, I understand.
Okay.
And I mean, I'd say from a user's perspective, we also are movement, and then to utilize. Do we lose them? No, there you are. The people care enough to utilize applications that protect their privacy, to where they're not being monetized off of, and their data isn't being collected every single time they enter the platform, and they don't know what's happening with it. So we think that the average user is gonna, for each of these applications that utilizes the protocol, is also gonna care, and be incentivized to use those applications.
Yeah, exactly. I think until now, a lot of users were kind of unaware of what's happening in the background with Facebook, Twitter, and all these social media applications in terms of how much data they're actually collecting. And so it was like they didn't even have, but like people are becoming more and more conscious of that and becoming aware of that. And I think they will start to care starting now, and they already are. So if we can build a platform that enables applications to take it, to not do, or yeah, to have an opportunity not to do that, I think we just think that's the future.
Got it. So can we talk a little bit about why, so you mentioned protocol, you mentioned platform. What exactly does Mercury protocol do?
Yeah, so essentially it's a suite of smart contracts and APIs that whether you're centralized, decentralized, a social networking app, a communication app, regardless of what kind of mobile application, desktop application, whatever application is, the idea is we want to create a set of smart contracts and APIs that you can use to take advantage of the tokenized EGMT. So we have these smart contracts that allow you to distribute tokens based on certain features that you care about, or distribute content based on certain features you care about. And we'll kind of build up these smart contracts over time. And then the other thing is we're providing easy-to-use APIs to be able to store the user content in a decentralized way on Ethereum, on IPFS, on Swarm, like so that even if you're not a blockchain expert and your product doesn't need to be on the blockchain, you can take advantage of these features that we're enabling with the protocol, with decentralized content, the tokenized economy, and like a shared pooled user base. So like every user of an application that integrates with the protocol, their identity is a single Ethereum address and then multiple wallets and accounts that are tied to that. And so each application might have their own accounts and stuff, but the root address is the same, that allows applications to pool their user bases as well. So you can think of it as like APIs and smart contracts that any application can use, essentially.
Got it. And so are these smart contracts implemented on Ethereum?
Yeah.
And is the API layer, do you just mean that anyone can call kind of the Ethereum's deployed smart contracts, or is there a separate API on top of that?
It's mostly for, like we're going to put out APIs for, like every application will need obviously how to manage their private keys and public keys for each account and that user. So like there's external stuff like that, like a wallet management and other APIs that we want to provide for applications because we have it already built. But the core is, APIs to interact with those smart contracts with the blockchain.
So are those APIs like applications that are proprietary?
Sorry, what do you mean?
So is that API like a proprietary application, right? What is an API, generally speaking? It's, some server that's hosting, some kind of REST interface, right?
Yeah, it's all open source. So like we'll have all the smart contracts and you can interact with the smart contracts directly. But if you want an easier way to interact with them, like most applications are used to using APIs, right? Open source APIs. So we'll build APIs on top of the smart contracts as well to give people the option to kind of use either an SDK, an API, or directly the smart contracts to integrate these features.
I understand. So you will build these APIs and then you will deploy these APIs on your own servers, is my question. Is that correct?
I mean, it's open source, so I'm not sure what you mean by our own servers.
So an API, right?
Yeah.
It has to live somewhere. You know, it might be the case that it's open source, sure.
Okay, the APIs, yeah, would live on our servers. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And then,
but you're saying that it's open, so anyone can come take your code and maybe like deploy it separately as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything.
So
Yeah.
specifically talking about the deployment of you know, the API application.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And so why would you guys build a protocol versus just building an application that does this to try to compete with some of those existing communication networks?
That's a good question. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the main point is that it's going to be application agnostic, so that it can, you know, any user base from any application can share it across the other application that utilizes the protocol, which helps grow the ecosystem, along with, you know, the fact that GMT can be used across each of those applications as well.
So it also sort of started as we've been looking at blockchain for a while and trying to see how we can integrate it. And as we started looking at putting it into Dust and Broadcast, we realized that communication platforms in general always benefit from network effects, just by definition of having more people to talk to. So if we were looking at a technology that's almost by definition built for the public use case, we thought it only made sense to open source it and make it available for other teams to integrate and sort of share our workload, or sorry, not workload, our work and product with more teams to connect the products together.
And the other thing is with the token, with the GMT token, right? Like you can build a kin-like ecosystem, sure, and that will only be useful within Kik, right? Whereas like if you think, if we end up onboarding like 20, 30, 50 applications, then GMT will be useful in 50 applications. So the token value also goes up if we kind of open this up and make it platform agnostic. And I think there's a lot to say about something like that versus having tokens for 100 different social networks.
Clarify.
Have you read the Kin white paper?
Yes, I have.
Are you aware that so the CoinFund team is a lead advisor on the Kin project, and we're actually like the authors of that paper where we describe the Kin rewards engine. Have you read it, that portion of it?
Yeah, I have.
So the Kin rewards engine is designed to sort of take advantage of the similar idea. You know, Kin is not just a currency that, I mean, theoretically, right, works inside of the Kik application. It is sort of an open rewards engine where other applications can also plug into it and integrate Kin and monetize through Kin. So in a similar way, you know, it's you could regard the Kin rewards engine itself, I mean, one day when it's, you know, fully decentralized, as a protocol, if you will, for doing a kind of a similar diversification across applications.
Oh, okay. I guess maybe I misread it because I thought the Kin was only useful for the Kin related ecosystem, which is their partners, their own.
So that's true. So you know, the Kik application would be the first application to integrate the cryptocurrency, but it's actually the development around Kin is open to, you know, any application that wants to develop for it.
Okay.
Right. So in a way, it's like there's an analogy here, and just trying to understand I mean, the economics of that system I think are different from what you guys are describing.
The incentives there, it's a rewards-based protocol in that sense, right?
That's right. Yeah. So it uses economic incentives that basically that live inside of the token supply to kind of go out and actually incentivize applications to build on that protocol. So can you guys talk a little bit about? So I understand. So you have a protocol. It's open. Like most of these blockchain protocols are. Applications can come in. Can you give us an example of like what kind of applications you'd want to see on top of Mercury?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Honestly, it's any application that wants to this more ownerless data and integrated communication network type of ecosystem. So the main goal for us is to create a foundation that innovation is rewarded versus the size of your user base. So in that regard, any application is welcome. And from the more business perspective of, I think, because that's the next follow-up of who do we target? In the short term, it's going to be, well, first the applications that have already reached out to us asking for integrations. And the next round is going to be either smaller existing apps or up-and-coming applications that pulling their user bases together. Once we start to get some traction, then we'll start going after bigger and bigger existing applications. Because at the moment, what we're calling social media 1.0 applications, Facebook, Instagram, etc., antithetical to their interests to join an ownerless content type ecosystem, because that's, as we discussed before, where they're making their revenue. So until we get to a competitive size user base, we realistically believe it's going to be smaller, more innovative feature exploratory platforms that are going to be joining us until we get to a comparable size in the hundreds of millions that we start getting the attention of the existing major players.
Yeah.
What are some categories of communication applications that you'd want to see there?
Messengers, social sharing platforms, content posting platforms,
Podcast applications, content.
Dating applications.
So you could have a messenger app, right? Just vanilla messaging. You can have something like a Medium where people post, articles to an audience. So it's like those two very different modalities of communication. One is real-time short messages. The other one is sort of offline, one-to-many posting. Is the intention to support kind of all manner of communication?
Yeah, I think the beauty of what we're doing is that all types can fit into the model. So whether it's real-time messaging or content photo sharing, developers are going to be able to utilize the protocol how they wish, and we think that inherently is a great thing.
Yeah, that's something we actually mentioned in the white paper too, where it's like there's different types of interactions, right? One-to-one, one-to-many, and so we think like this kind of model will have smart contracts and features that are targeted at both of these. Because you think about Dust, like Dust is the one-to-one messenger, but we also have the one-to-many option as well, and we're going to be integrating the protocol for both of those, and so the same thing for other applications.
Right. So if you're a messaging application, are you using the protocol to store the data that's happening within this messaging application, or are you using using the protocol as a monetization layer only?
I would say both.
Yeah.
So the tokenized economy, that's kind of an obvious thing. Since you're an expert on kin, we don't really have to explain that. And then the second, the content thing, it's obviously up to the application developer what they want to open up and allow a user to. For example, I can imagine a world where I send a Twitter DM to a friend, to 3 friends on Twitter, but those 3 friends, but my other friends are on WhatsApp. I would love that same group message to go to my WhatsApp friends as well. And if an application is willing to kind of put their content on store the content via the protocol in a decentralized way, then they can enable these kinds of cross-application communication, because any application can have access to that content.
So yeah, so I agree. You know, if the value proposition is to sort of move the data storage layer out of these proprietary silos, right, that are created by centralized traditional companies, then it would make sense to sort of move it into like a decentralized layer, have a protocol on top of that. But my follow-up question to that would be, you know, however, like different kinds of applications, right? So like a messaging application versus a Reddit style or Medium style application would have quite different requirements, right, for how that data is stored and accessed. So, you know, a messaging application would have to be like really real time, and it'd have to have like quick access to the data stored in the layer, whereas you know, a Medium type application would want to be in some kind of CDN to like very quickly load up like a long article. So how do you guys think about the, you know, the different data requirements across the applications built on top of the protocol?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, with real-time messaging, I mean, real-time messaging purely on the blockchain, even today, regardless of the protocol or not, it just is unrealistic. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's a lot of innovation happening, right? Like things like state channels. Why can't we access content using a state channel type of model where we're not interacting with the blockchain for these really real-time messages, but we're only interacting with the blockchain when we need to maybe store the messages or secure the messages or encrypt the messages or whatever it is. So yes, you're right. Like interacting on the blockchain via real-time messaging is not going to be possible, but there's a lot of the scalability solution and real-time solutions are mostly handled off blockchain, and you do stuff on the blockchain when you need to at the beginning and the end of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, it would be very, very expensive, right, if you were to store all the Medium data on Ethereum, right? It would be like gajillions of dollars. So in that context, like what is the storage layer for this protocol?
So this is something we are still honestly evaluating. So we've looked at IPFS, we've looked at Swarm. Swarm is a little bit early right now. I don't see that being production ready. So I think our best bet right now is we're going to be going with IPFS, and then we're also talking to a few other solutions, smaller solutions that have reached out to us and want us to use them. And this is something we'll probably have a better answer for in about a month when we release the more technical architecture and paper around exactly how the storage component would work. But that's kind of what we're looking at.
Got it. And
yeah.
But at the same time, in the context of messaging, you probably want to think about security of this data as well. Have you guys given some thought to how it would be stored in a way that like it wouldn't kind of leak private information?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that Dust, as our first product, is a primarily security-based application as a value prop. So we have a fairly strong understanding, in my opinion, of what security entails from a top-tier level.
Yeah, and you're right, like in the sense that because the blockchain is public and everything is open and accessible, privacy is a big thing. But again, this is something that we are thinking through with various privacy solutions. So like things like for very private information, maybe we would want to store that off blockchain and then communicate it via oracles. Another option is thinking about things like CK snarks to be able to verify that some message was sent or some transaction happened, but not necessarily reveal the actual content of it. So depending on the level of privacy that each piece of content will require, we'll have to think through what is the privacy requirements. But I think for right now, I would say the most nearest solution for us, or the most accessible solution is using oracles to store some of the content off blockchain and then access it from the smart contracts using oracles, and have privacy that way.
Understood. We have a question here in the chat, which is an interesting question, if coming from Nathan Windsor, sort of asking, because there's already so many different kinds of communication APIs in the world, and I'm sure he means both centralized and decentralized. How do you compete as yet another API against these other incumbents?
Yeah, I was actually just messaging with him a bit in the chat. But from our perspective, the idea is very few of these communication companies that are coming out with a value prop are able to survive long enough to achieve mass use. And the main issue we see there is that if we can provide a way by sharing user bases and providing a tokenized ecosystem, that these applications can make their upkeep costs without monetizing user data or needing to reach a critical user base size that they can monetize and support their upkeep, it's more likely that we'll see more innovation and more surviving smaller scale companies.
And they can share in an already existing user base.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, like in the sense that if some existing application with an existing user base goes onto the protocol, that user base can share across other applications in the same protocol?
Yeah, basically. So for example, we're talking to a dozen or so applications. They're smaller, they're not Facebook scale, but they see the benefit in using the GMT token system, the reputation system, and the ownerless content system. And so if you can get so one of our goals over the next year, once we open source it, is like, let's get like 10, 20, 30 of these early nimble applications on board, really get their content in a decentralized, ownerless fashion, and then at that point we can start to attract bigger and bigger applications.
Mm.
And one of the main benefits we see from an application developer perspective is that if you had versions of messaging, and it was just like plain text storage, the product does well because there's no competition yet. It's purely innovation based. It's great. Everyone loves it. You get 100 million daily active users, and then somebody releases an encrypted messenger that does everything perfectly, just as great product experience. It's also encrypted, no cost. But the problem is your friends aren't on it. So unless they're able to pull off an excellent marketing strategy and bootstrap their network in a certain way, it's going to be very difficult to compete against the entrenched incumbent. So with the shared user base, if you can trickle over new users, they can still maintain their existing network and still message them, whatever, and there's no cost to switching over to the new platform instead of having to give up their existing build network.
Mm-hmm. Understood. So you guys mentioned that this protocol, the Mercury protocol, has a token. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What's the token referred to?
Global messaging token.
Messaging token.
Okay, cool. And so does the protocol, let's talk about that for a second. So does the protocol itself monetize through the token, or is it more that every kind of, it's sort of a transactional currency on top of the protocol, and then every application monetizes through the token?
It's the latter. So the protocol itself is open source and doesn't really monetize. It provides the infrastructure for applications that build on top to monetize off of GMT if they want to.
So let me be a little bit more precise. Like, do you ever have to pay that token to, let's say, get an access to some kind of functionality of the protocol?
No.
Good. So, I mean to say good because it's agnostic, but I'm just trying to understand. Okay, so when, like, does a user of a protocol have to use the token at all?
So again, because there's multiple parts to this protocol, there's that content storage layer, there's the token, there's the reputation system, which we really haven't gotten into. Like, an application can choose to use any of the 3 components. So if they don't choose to use the GMT token features where they want to enable a token ecosystem for users to maybe pay X amount to distribute these tokens, and the user of that application is never going to see GMT. But we think that the initial applications that come on board, like GMT, the tokenization contracts are the first ones that are going to be put out in open source. So we think the initial applications will probably be using that most likely. And so at least in the early applications, all users will likely be in.
So what, on the, on the secondary markets, right, when this token, presumably if it ever has a dollar value, right? What are the factors in the price of that token? So if you're kind of like not tying the token to the usage of the protocol, what that means is that if there's a large number of protocol users, that's sort of independent of its price. So is the price of this token kind of fully speculative, or what are the core drivers of it?
The core driver is that the more applications that build on top that use a token, that means there's more services that are offered by that users can buy with this token, or purchase with this token. So that's how the value of it goes up, because the utility of that token increases, and when the utility of an asset increases, the value goes up too, right?
But you're sort of so I agree with that. But you're sort of making the assumption that a bunch of third-party applications will build their functionality in such a way that they will confer utility to the token. So let's talk about Dust, for example, right? So you're in charge of building Dust. What does Dust do?
It's a heavily encrypted private messenger.
Okay, and so how would I use the token in that messaging context?
Well, say you wanted to send a encrypted PDF file that was very large, and another user, a group of people within your company that also had the application. You could utilize a certain amount of GMT to pay to send that PDF, to encrypt it and send it.
And who is that? So who's doing the work of encryption such that they are going to be compensated?
That would be the application level.
So meaning the centralized application will charge users for the service of encrypting a file?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. What are some other examples of the way that this token would monetize in other applications?
Sorry, it cut out. Did you say in any application or in Dust?
In other applications in the platform. So that's like one model, right? You're paying for a service. The service that you're paying for is the encryption of large files or the storage of large files or whatever it is. What are some other examples of how other applications might create a utility case between, like, why do I go out onto the market and buy a token? Right. That's the question you want to answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say that one of the great things about this in our eyes is that it's so applicable to many cases, and the idea that it's application-specific use cases. So like we said in Dust, the basic mechanics of the current state of the app are like messages last for 24 hours. You can only send text and photo. So in that example, you can send bigger files. You can potentially send messages that are send messages that last longer than messages that repeatedly alert the recipient as an urgent message until they're received. It's whatever the application developer sees as useful to their ecosystem. So in a more one-to-many type system, you have the premium distribution type features. You can do premium content creation filters or tools. You can do access to VIP chat rooms or influencer meetups.
Let's give an example. I mean, say there's a communication platform that comes out to where influential people or anyone hosts AMAs like this. And you have certain users that come onto the platform that want to be heard by a certain influencer that's doing the AMA at the time. They could use a certain amount of GMT to bump themselves up, get to the front of the line, make their question be heard, etc. I mean, that's one of an unlimited or infinite amount of examples of where it could be utilized. But I just wanted to give a
Yeah,
real
that's a good example, and kind of almost similar to the Steam model, right? It's like why do you buy Steam? In the long term, you buy Steam because having Steam allows you to have more reputation, which allows you to get higher, right, higher visibility on the Steam platform, and then users are actually driven to want that the larger the network effect of Steam is, right? So it's like if I'm a 20 years from now, hypothetically, right, if I'm a business and Steam is this huge network, and just like today every business has to be on Twitter and Facebook, maybe in 20 years everybody also has to be on Steam, right? So there's this really high incentive for people to go out into the market and buy those tokens so they can kind of promote themselves. And so, of course, I just made like a really, really big assumption there. And the assumption is that Steam will actually eventually grow to have this large network effect.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys are kind of making a similar assumption, like to assume that someone will want to pay for the service of encrypting a large file versus using, let's say, Signal, which is free, right? Then you have to assume that there's some kind of network effect on that messaging application. And similarly with a Medium or Steam style application, to assume that users paying to get to the top of the line or to the front of the line there, or to get more visibility, you need to assume that there's this bigger network effect. So,
well, I think to clarify there, it's not necessarily like paying in our eyes, because one of the core mechanics of the protocol that we're promoting to anyone that integrates it is awarding users for performing various activities on the application level. So in our case, for example, in the first version, logging into Dust every day, checking your messages fast, transfers into a better user experience for the network will be awarded with tokens. So it's not about buying tokens during the sale and hoping that you have enough to last you through. It's about being an active participant in the network at an application level of what is a good experience for the network, and then using the awarded tokens to gain access to the premium features of those applications you like.
So I get that, but kind of my point is that the tokens are only valuable, right, if their price is supported.
And I think I know what you're getting at. You're trying to say that like everything we do on we're so used to getting everything for free, so we have to convince users to pay for certain things now. And I think that's almost a good thing, because like we get so much for free, but a lot of it is like meaningless interaction. So if you can incentivize application developers to build interactions that users want to pay for, because that's the best way they can make money, like that's I think that's a better model than kind of just getting clicks and views and everywhere, and building for that kind of infrastructure, like building for features that users really care about and actually value, right?
Mm-hmm. Cool, awesome. Well, guys, we're getting toward the end here. What is some of the information that you'd like to have the people who might be watching this know about the project? What's next?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll just say as of yesterday, we went live with registration for the token launch event coming up end of the month. And following that, we're going to be preparing the technical white paper to give it the architecture analysis of the protocol and prepare to open source that by end of year. So we're hoping to sort of get the community involved as soon as possible on this. So we'll be putting up the wiki, open source code in the next few months, the general architecture documents, how to get involved. You can reach out to us at any time, info@mercuryprotocol.com.
Where do folks go to learn more about the product, read your white paper, and maybe learn more about the token distribution that you're doing?
Sorry, Brooke.
Where would people go to read more about the project and to find out more about the token distribution that you're doing?
Yeah, you can go to mercuryprotocol.com, and then we have all the links for the white paper, the blog, and various Slack channels and community channels. All
right, fantastic. Mercury Protocol, check it out. Thank you, Preeti and Ryan and Ian, for answering my questions and digging really deep into the protocol layer there. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you
you.
for having us.
Thanks.
All right.